You are naked. Your bare feet stick to the freezing glazed tile floor of a Wehrmacht recruiting station in the suburbs of Berlin. Spring of '39. You are 18 years old. The air in the room is thick with the sour stench of sweat from dozens of shivering boys standing in line. The military doctor's gaze sweeps over your scrawny chest. Hands in cold rubber gloves lightly tap a medical hammer against your knee. The muscle reflex jerks. Heart rate normal. Musculature unremarkable. You are not a metallurgical engineer, nor a highly skilled mechanic. You possess no core civilian value that needs to be retained on the home front. The red ink stamp slams down on your WherePass file with a loud thud. Fit for service. You bite your lip, dip the pen in ink, and sign your name. From this second on, you become a Schütze, a private. You are issued a rough wool Feldgrau field uniform. The stiff fabric chafes the skin on your neck raw. A pair of iron hobnailed boots pinches your heels tight. A heavy Mauser Car 9 8K rifle, slathered in cosmoline preservative grease, is shoved hard against your chest. The summer months that follow slip by in blinding dust and relentless screaming. Load, chamber around, aim, fire, stand at attention, repeat. Repeat until every muscle fiber memorizes the action without your brain needing to intervene. The Reich does not need you to think. It only needs you to obediently follow orders. September 1st of that year. The war officially begins. The Reich throws you straight into an endless marching formation. Dust billows blindingly from the wheels of the armor advancing ahead, clawing into your throat, clinging to the slimy sweat on your face. Your ears throb from the howling sirens of Stuka dive bombers plunging from the heavens. Following the howl is an explosion that tears your eardrums apart, hurling thick columns of black earth up into the sky. You trudge through flaming ruins. The hobnails of your boots crunch over scattered brass casings. Along the ditches on both sides, your eyes are met by horse-drawn wagons and the bloated carcasses of Polish war horses, swarming with green blowflies. Interspersed among them are the blood-soaked bodies of soldiers in olive green coats, lying next to churned-up trenches. You grip your Car 9 8K tightly, your sweaty palms slipping on the wooden stock. Your stomach knots? The brutality of mobile warfare is laid bare before your eyes. This war is too big, and you are too small. Then the autumn rains hit. The thick, freezing, polished fog begins to seep through your wool tunic. Slushy mud sucks at your every step. One night, amidst the growling thuds of distant artillery barrages shaking the ground sheets, the young man lying next to you quietly disappears. A deserter, someone who panicked, his mind crushed before he even saw blood by his own hands. The next morning, an empty, glaring gap appears in the ranks. No questions are asked. Not a single search party is sent out. The officer coldly jerks his chin. You take a step forward. The Polish campaign ends in a flash in the mud, leaving behind an erased nation and the ashes of villages you didn't even have time to learn the names of. But the war machine abruptly stalls. The phony war, the Sitzkrieg, begins. You are herded back to the western border, stuffed into the gray, damp concrete bunkers of the Siegfried Line. Condensation gathers on the bunker ceiling, dripping steadily onto the muddy, mossy floor. The musty smell of damp wool mixes with the stench of lice, cheap tobacco, and stale sweat clinging to your skin. Day after day, you stand guard under bone-chilling north winds, constantly clicking your hobnailed heels together to keep your blood from freezing. Your exhaled breath forms plumes of opaque white smoke, freezing on the rim of your steel helmet. Straining your eyes through the fog toward the French Maginot Line, you see nothing but silent coils of barbed wire. The clicking sound of cards being shuffled echoes monotonously in the dark corner of the bunker. A few men scribble terse letters home, then crumple them up and toss them into the corner. You scrub your Car 9 8K until the wood is smooth, gnaw on pieces of rock-hard black Kommissbrot bread, and obediently snap to attention at every roll call. Your mechanical obedience disappears into the ranks of tens of thousands of other nameless infantrymen. Finally, the system sets its sights on a new target. The order to break camp is passed down. Whistles shriek, tearing through the freezing fog. You and dozens of other soldiers are herded onto cramped freight cars, reeking of horse manure and rotting straw. The heavy iron doors screech and then slam shut, locking everyone in a dark, suffocating space. One man's knee jams into another's thigh. Someone vomits in the corner of the car from motion sickness and lack of air. The sour stench of gastric acid wafts up, but no one has enough room to step back. You are being transported straight toward the heart of France, The spring of your 19th year slips away through narrow gaps in the wooden planks that let in faint light and floating dust motes. You pass out amidst the deafening noise until the iron doors are suddenly yanked open. The glaring sunlight of a new land, mixed with the roaring of Stukas in the sky. France. The sweeping campaign begins. You silently march on foot deep inland, your hobnailed boots pounding against the sweltering asphalt. Then suddenly, a wind-tearing shriek hits. Ambush. Dirt and rocks fly up blindingly, clanking against the rim of your steel helmet. Machine gun fire ruthlessly chews up the grass by the roadside. The officer standing 3 paces away from you collapses. A bullet hole tears through his chest, blood spraying in an arc, dyeing a patch of his tunic red. The chain of command is abruptly severed. The formation wavers. The wide, terrified eyes of the rookies begin to fall back. The shell of discipline is on the verge of shattering. The rifle in your hands tracks purely on momentum. Your heart pounds. You know the operation of the structure is fracturing and must be reconnected. Hold the line. Your voice roars, hoarse with dust. You unconsciously repeat the exact last order you had heard. The retreating formation suddenly halts. The firing line stabilizes and begins spitting fire in return. A few days later, a dull aluminum trim is tossed to you to sew onto your collar edge. The Reich has acknowledged your obedience. You officially become an Unteroffizier. Corporal. France falls. The gunfire on the Western Front dies down. You patrol unfamiliar streets, guarding warehouses in the night fog. You polish your black boots until you can see your reflection in them, snapping to attention and saluting staff cars as they speed by. There is no spilled blood. Your gaze is now sharp and cold, sweeping over the replacement rookies, forcing them into the mold. The months of garrison duty are tedious and drag on endlessly. The following spring, the order to break camp drops suddenly. Once again, the cramped cattle cars. Again, the smell of rotting straw, gun grease, and sour sweat. The iron doors slam shut. The sound of iron wheels screeches, grinding rhythmically on the tracks, taking you away from the false peace of the West, rumbling backward toward the east. The endlessly long journey drains your physical strength. You pass out in the suffocating darkness and deafening noise until the iron doors are suddenly yanked open. Glaring sunlight crashes into your pupils. Summer of 41. You are 20 years old. Operation Barbarossa opens like a hurricane of steel. The sickly yellow dust of the Soviet steppes billows up under millions of boot heels, shooting straight into your face. Your throat is bone dry. The metallic tang of blood from corpses baking under the harsh sun mixes with the salty taste of dirt and sweat. The concept of blitzkrieg materializes right before your eyes in the grinding sound of Panzer tank tracks, tearing up the dry grass on the horizon. Now, wearing the dull aluminum trim on your collar, you don't just stand in line. You hold control over the life and death of the men within that line. Your gaze is sharp and cold, scanning the backs of the necks of rookies panting heavily from stress. Then the enemy appears from a labyrinth of meticulously camouflaged trenches. Gunfire erupts. The screaming clatter of metal weaves into a blistering net of fire. Suddenly, an ear-splitting shriek dives down. Mortars. Boom. A column of earth blasts into the air. Right before your eyes, the lieutenant commanding the platoon takes a piece of shrapnel. The upper half of his torso is pulverized, turned into a mangled mess of flesh and blood mixed with shreds of his soaked wool tunic. He collapses without even having the time to scream. The chain of command is cleanly severed. The visual shock strikes the formation directly. The wide, terrified eyes of the rookies stare blankly at the incomplete corpse. From the opposite side, the brown-clad shadows of the Red Army begin pouring out of their trenches like a swarm of frenzied ants, the chilling cry of "Ura" echoing in the air. The shell of iron discipline is on the verge of shattering. Some start to fall back, dropping their weapons, their survival instinct screaming at them to flee. But the system programmed into your brain does not allow that to happen. You do not panic. The bolt carrier slides back with a sharp clack. You flip the safety off your MP-40 submachine gun, unleashing a blazing red volley of bullets tearing through the smoke to halt the enemy's advance. "Get in position! Fire at will!" you scream, your hoarse, ruthless voice overpowering the explosions. A panicked private trying to turn and run brushes past you. You show no mercy. You swing the stock of your submachine gun, delivering a brutal blow straight to his face, the sound of cartilage crunching. Bloody mucus and broken teeth fly out. He falls backward into the mud. You grab him by the collar, throwing him right back into the lip of the bomb crater. pointing the smoking barrel of your gun straight at the back of his neck. You become the violent whip of the machine, using extreme ruthlessness to crush cowardice. You force them to choose between facing the enemy's muzzles or taking an executioner's bullet from your own hands. The tattered defensive line is ultimately held together by blood and extreme coercion. The dense net of firepower forces the enemy to retreat. As the gunsmoke and dust gradually settle, revealing a battlefield littered with corpses, the system coldly reassesses your chain of reactions. Not for bravery, but for the ability to neutralize human emotion in order to protect the structure. The Reich tosses you a new, more powerful position. Feldwebel, Sergeant First Class. You march through winters of frozen blood and seasons of slushy mud. But the deeper you sink into the Russian plains, the more the momentum of the advance is drained. On the marches dragging through desolate forest edges, the war machine lays bare its ultimate inhuman nature. In January of '42, a flash conference at Wannsee officially adopted the final solution, aiming to exterminate the Jews of Europe. In the territories far behind the front lines, the Reich was frantically erecting massive extermination camps, like Auschwitz, Birkenau, Treblinka, and Sobibor. In those factories of death, millions of Jewish men, women, and children were herded into gas chambers, mass murdered with Zyklon B poison gas, and their bodies were then thrown into colossal crematoria, operating relentlessly, day and night. You do not directly stand guard at those concentration camps, but the remnants of this genocidal industry still cling to your sense of smell right on the march. You pass by forests tightly cordoned off by black-clad SS troops. A thick, dark smoke blots out the sun, carrying a burnt, nauseating stench that rolls in on the north wind. You know full well that is not the smell of gun smoke, not the smell of burning horse carcasses or straw. It is the smell of human fat. Through the barbed wire fences, you catch glimpses of emaciated slave laborers being forced to unload tens of thousands of corpses from mass graves, the bodies of Jews and civilians who had been massacred by machine guns the previous year, stacking them onto massive pyres doused in gasoline in an attempt to erase all traces. This war machine is operating an assembly line to entirely eradicate the existence of an entire people. Your stomach knots in a chilling wave of nausea, but your institutionalized brain immediately orders you to ignore it. You do not question it, without a shred of resistance. You lower your voice, ordering the young soldiers to turn their faces away and keep marching. The structure of discipline does not permit curiosity or compassion. That complicit silence turns you into a ruthless and perfect piece of the atrocity. The endless scorched wheat fields finally recede, giving way to massive, gray, sullen blocks of reinforced concrete rising against the horizon. You stomp your hobnailed boots into the outskirts of Stalingrad, the bloody, frenzied tug-of-war fighting over every square meter of land, every bullet-riddled wall, and every smoking pile of rubble. One late autumn night, your battalion is trapped in the ruins of a train station. Red Army mortars rain down, churning up everything. Suddenly, an earth-shattering explosion completely collapses the company command bunker. Glowing red brick dust billows up, suffocating you. When you use your bare hands to dig through the rubble and crawl down, the commanding captain and both lieutenants have already been turned into mangled blocks of meat, mixed in with the bricks and stones. The radio man, missing an arm, is screaming insanely. The local command system is severed at its roots. The grinding sound of T-34 tank tracks rasps outside the wall. The men start throwing down their weapons, backing away from the defensive positions. The shell of discipline is about to burst. You do not panic. You snatch the blood-soaked radio handset, step over the officer's corpse, and coldly report the coordinates, calling for artillery support right on top of your own position. Then you crawl up to the surface. The barrel of your MP-40 submachine gun spits blazing red bullets. You use the stock of your gun to knock down those who are running away, kick them back up, forcing them to turn back and glue their eyes to the sights of the MG-34 machine gun nest. You coordinate the firepower, plug men into the gaps, and maintain the rate of fire of men who are going mad with fear. You hold that pile of gray rubble through the dark night, gritting your teeth to keep the structure from a chain reaction collapse before the exhausted relief force drags itself there. Amidst that hell on earth, a crumpled, soot-covered promotion order is sent down from the division. You are promoted to Oberfeldwebel, Master Sergeant. Looking at the piece of insignia cloth, you understand a brutal truth. You were not promoted and given command because you excellently passed the elegant exams at a military academy. You got it simply because the system had been ground down and depleted of men. The command corps had crumbled. The front line was left with only frozen corpses. You assume command. The order from high command comes down through the static of the radio. Hold the Red October tractor factory at all costs. You know full well it's a mass grave. Ammunition is depleted. Rations are nothing but pieces of bread frozen as hard as rock, which you have to smash into crumbs with your rifle butt just to chew. The shadows of Russian soldiers in white snowcoats surge forward, wave after wave. You inspect every bomb crater, manually adjusting every machine gun nest. You heartlessly kick the men who fall asleep from exhaustion, forcing them to open their eyes and keep pulling the trigger. You hold that section of the line for 48 hours of hell. The system acknowledges and honors you, but deep down, your ironclad brain knows. You merely traded the lives of your squad to delay the collapse for another 2 days, creating just enough time margin for other high-level cogs in the command center to fall back. Year 43. You are 22 years old. The Great Curse Salient has turned into a colossal graveyard of molten steel. The Great Retreat westward begins. The autumn mud of Russia is thick, freezing, and slushy, like a cruel glue that swallows your hobnailed boots every time you try to pull your foot up. The air reeks of burnt oil, gun smoke, and the acrid stench of rotting flesh. You are no longer the one directly pointing a gun barrel to spray bullets into the fog. Your leather-gloved hand now holds a red grease pencil. You stand brooding behind a crumpled, yellowed operational map, hastily spread over the hood of a shattered Hanomag armored half-track. The academically trained officers have all left their corpses on the battlefield, and the system automatically shifts the entire weight of an exhausted infantry company onto your shoulders. Your responsibilities are now more macro, broader, and ultimately inhuman. A sharp twist cuts across the perception of the 22-year-old young man. You suddenly understand that what the flashy military academies call battlefield tactics is, in reality, just a cold-blooded mathematical problem of allocating death to yield the highest efficiency, deciding who will be the spearhead to advance, and who will be the bait that must fall. The thunder of the Red Army's artillery grows closer by the minute. The enemy's ragged forces have completely punched through both of your flanks. Your company is trapped in a pocket that is being drawn tight. The field radio set crackles with static. A dry, insane halt-to-befehl order comes down from some warm command post hundreds of kilometers away. Hold the position to the last man. No retreat permitted. You trudge along the dark trench, mud up to your ankles. Your eyes sweep over the blood-soaked stretchers laid out in the corner of the trench. The stench of necrosis is overpowering. Dozens of severely wounded men are groaning and convulsing. A young soldier missing a leg grabs the hem of your coat, weakly begging for a dose of morphine that ran out long ago. You gently pry his hand away, your face frozen in apathy. Then you turn to look at the elite core of the company. Battle-hardened veterans, faces blackened with soot, exhausted, leaning against the soaking wet dirt walls, unloading their magazines to count every single bullet. The reality of the picture is all too clear. You make your decision. The structure and survival of the machine are more important than a delusional order. Pitch black night falls. Not a single star. Every cough is suppressed. Every piece of metal equipment that clinks is tightly wrapped in rags. You organize a controlled retreat, making the most ruthless decision of your life. You coldly abandon all the severely wounded at the bottom of the trench. To rationalize the escape, you leave behind a few MG-42 machine guns along with the most critically injured soldiers and a few disciplinary violators. Fire continuously. Hold them back. You order briefly, absolutely without a promise to return for them. You turn them into flesh pawns to camouflage the footsteps of your retreat. Under the cover of fog, you silently lead the core of the company, weaving through the minefields, escaping the pocket of death. You have blatantly violated the military order to fight to the death. According to military law, you should be stripped of your weapons, stood against a wall, and face the firing squad of a court-martial. But when dawn breaks, and the Russians have ground the old strongpoint into dust, the system realizes a truth. Your company still exists on the defensive organizational chart, instead of being completely wiped out. Summer of 44. You are 23 years old. This should be the most brilliant age of a person's life, the age of lecture halls or machine shops ringing with laughter. But your world has shrunk to concrete bunkers reeking of mold, stale, cheap tobacco smoke, and the sour sweat of utter panic. In June of that year, the Red Army's Operation Bagration crashes down like a tsunami, crushing the Reich's entire army group center into dust. You enter the ranks of the local staff, You no longer see the battlefield directly, no longer hear the groans of the wounded or the grinding crunch of tank tracks. Before you now are crumpled, torn operational maps, covered in bloody red grease pencil lines that are tightening ever closer toward the west. Dry rows of casualty data pour in continuously via teletype, and the survival rate is plummeting unchecked. The once proud armored divisions now shatter one after another under the pressure of Soviet artillery. You work like a mad machine, losing all concept of day and night. Your eyes have dark circles, bloodshot with red veins. Your task is the Kampfgruppe, creating patchwork combat groups. You scrape together remnants, merging the chipped battalions of this infantry division with a few rusted tanks from another armored division. You stitch those shattered fragments into a new combat entity, give it a meaningless name, and throw it back into the slaughterhouse. Cut here, patch there. You create no turning point victories. History will never call your name in heroic chronicles. You are merely using mechanical precision to stuff boulders into the massive cracks of a breaking dam, gritting your teeth to prevent a chain reaction collapse across the entire front. The Reich acknowledges that invaluable utility. A crumpled commission paper is hastily signed. You officially cross the line from non-commissioned officer into the ranks of commissioned officers. Lieutenant, second lieutenant. You do the planning work of a staff colonel, but the machine only assigns you the lowest officer rank. Early 45, you turn 24. The Great Retreat has been pushed deep into the borders of the fatherland. Ice covers the Oder River. The ceiling of the bunker shakes violently. Plaster falls in continuous showers like gray snow, covering the operational maps white every time Allied bombs, or Katyusha rockets rain down relentlessly. The upper echelon command system is paralyzed. Senior officers have either committed suicide, fled, or left their corpses on the front. Amidst that chaos, you are hoisted into a new position. The promotion ceremony is rushed, fleeting, under the sallow, flickering light of a generator whining pitifully. Gray plaster dust flutters down onto the cold metal star just hastily pressed onto the frayed shoulder board of your field tunic. Oberleutnant. First lieutenant. You stroke the new piece of insignia, realizing a bitterly suffocating truth. You were hoisted into that command chair because the system is dead, entirely depleted of brains with higher authority. At the age of 24, with the rank of a junior officer, you must once again shoulder the responsibility of defending an entire defensive sector, managing units still bearing the flashy name Division, but whose combined troop strength is merely that of a battered company. Under your command now are no longer combat soldiers, but the Volkssturm militia, doddering old veterans of World War I and children still wet behind the ears from the Hitler Youth. You must set up defenses based on anti-tank trench lines that exist only in the delusional drawings of the High Command all the way in Berlin, but which in reality out there are merely shallow mud pits. You realize you are absolutely not controlling this war. You cannot protect anyone. You are merely using the last shred of an individual's vitality to maintain a fake heartbeat for a clinically dead machine, forcibly prolonging its death throes by a few days, a few hours. You are a system-level component, trying to patch together an order that has rotted to its very roots. Everything is just waiting for one final spark to turn to ash. April of 45, still at 24, but you carry a soul aged a century. The sky over Berlin glows blood red with fire. Soot flutters down on your shoulders like a black snow of death. You stand amidst the rubble of a shredded intersection, smoke rising with an acrid stench. Under your command now are no battle-hardened SS veterans or elite paratroopers. They are 14-year-old boys in oversized uniforms, trembling as they clutch Panzerfaust launchers and coughing, doddering old men clumsily holding rusted rifles from the First World War. The field radio crackles with the final order from the underground bunker. Hold the position at all costs. No retreat permitted. The grinding crunch of T-34 tank tracks on rubble rumbles closer to the street corner. The ground shakes violently. You look at this final scenario. Look at the last fragments of the machine. You know full well there is no relief army. The sacrifice of these children has absolutely no tactical meaning. It cannot change the outcome. The curtain has fallen. But you slowly raise your hand to adjust your soot-covered collar. You squeeze past the torn sandbags, looking straight into the wide, terrified, tear-filled eyes of a child clutching a gun. Hold position. Load your weapon. You give the order not because you blindly believe in some wonder weapon or final victory, nor out of a loyalty that shattered long ago. You give the order because the structure of the Reich dictates it. You are the first lieutenant. He is the soldier, and the machine requires him to die, to stall the enemy for another 5 minutes. The order is given. The boy charges forward. A flash of fire blazes, then everything plunges into deadly silence. May of 45. The Reich collapses. The Red Army plants its flag on the Reichstag building. The colossal war machine shatters into 100,000 pieces of scrap metal. For the first time in 6 years, you are stripped of your rank, stripped clean of everything. You survive the POW camps, dragging your battered body back to a devastated, divided Germany. But you realize a tragedy of someone who has been institutionalized. A cog cannot exist on its own without the gearbox. You do not know how to be a normal human being. The concept of peace suffocates you. And so you go looking for a new machine. You sign the papers to join the French Foreign Legion, Légion étrangère. They do not care about your past or your old first lieutenant rank. They only need the mechanical obedience and proficient killing skills you have been forged with. You trade your Stahlhelm steel helmet for a white kepi. The new machine tosses you onto a ship halfway across the globe, throwing you into the stifling ancient jungles of Indochina. Gone is the bone-cutting cold of Stalingrad. Now it's the sticky, humid heat, tropical mud, jungle leeches, and invisible ambushes along Route 4 or the Dien Bien Phu Basin. You pull the trigger again. You become an emotionless instrument of violence once more. But this time, the machine has wrung out your last drops of oil. The Plasmodium parasite pierces through your apathetic shell, eating deep into your blood. Over 20 years later, the jungle malaria bouts hit without warning, convulsing your body on the rickety bed in a drab apartment in West Germany. Cold sweat pours out, soaking the yellowed bedsheets. The siren of a police car on the street outside wails, tearing through the wind. Out of a habit born of blood and bone, your right hand unconsciously fumbles under the pillow, searching for the grip of a Luger pistol, then touches the cruel emptiness and silently pulls back. You stare blankly at the cracked ceiling, your breath catching. In some dusty archive, your file has been closed with cold, typewritten lines. Fully promoted. No treason. Unremarkable. You were not dragged before the Nuremberg trials because you were too small for anyone to bother remembering. Nor were you honored on a memorial monument because you had no glorious exploits. The entirety of your youth was merely a string of cold data for the system. Recruitment, training, utilization, and now. In your fading breaths, you realize the ultimate truth. You did not rise through the ranks because of talent or excellence. You climbed up solely because everyone standing in line ahead of you had already turned to ash. You were an empty slot being filled, forced to operate until the machine completely collapsed. Now, with the war machine long dead, you too are just a piece of scrap metal waiting to rust. The raging fever burns your flesh. In your final delirium, no glorious battlefield or faces of loved ones appear before your eyes. You only see the cramped cattle cars, the sickly yellow dust at Kursk, and the terrified eyes of the 15-year-old boy clutching the Panzerfaust from all those years ago. The cog finally stops turning.